The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the webinar. We will start in 2 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the RapidiOnline webinar regarding integrating Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics ERP. We are excited about having you here today. With me, I have Thomas Boring, one of our senior consultants who have been Rapidi consultants almost since the beginning. He has done hundreds of these integrations. So I encourage you to use the question sections on the GoToWebinar in case you have any questions throughout this session. Then we will pick it up either during the webinar itself or at the very end. So please feel free to ask any questions that jumps to your mind. Before we start, I want to bring your attention to the handout that is also uploaded already. In case you are more curious, you can go to the rapidionline.com/resources on our website, or you can go to wiki@myrapidi.com, where you can find a lot of additional information and a lot more than we will be able to cover during this session. But welcome everybody, and please enjoy the session. Let's jump into the Rapidi solution and what it is that we can do for you guys. Rapidi is the company. RapidiOnline is the solution that we have made. Rapidi is specialized in doing the Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics integrations. Having said that, we are an open cloud integration platform that can integrate with a lot of other systems as well. But when we do it, it is typically in combination of a Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics integration. The integration itself is cloud-based. It is robust with no staging of data, which means that any exchange or synchronization we do of data happens directly between the systems. We don't store any of your data on any Rapidi servers at any point in time. And it's also a complete programming free platform, which means that you don't have to do any code changes in Salesforce. You don't have to do any code changes in Microsoft Dynamics, and you don't have to do any programming in RapidiOnline itself in order to do your integration. That makes everything a lot easier. The platform is flexible to support multiple endpoints. That means different systems. It could be multiple databases or companies. A very common scenario is when you have multiple ERP systems or companies, and you want to integrate all of these into one instance of Salesforce, and that is also supported out of the box with the RapidiOnline solution. At Rapidi, we are solution experts with both Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics expertise, and that is something that we have decided long ago is required to have the deep level of understanding, not only about how to integrate, but also how to build a robust integration that supports your business processes. It's a very flexible out-of-the-box integration system. Having said that, you also have the possibility to add additional synchronizations to the integration as to your requirements, but we will come back to that a little later. You might ask yourself, why do we want to integrate the systems? And the obvious answer is to avoid the double data entries. What we see throughout the different customer cases we have is that once you eliminate the double data entries, meaning that you have to key in the same information in multiple systems, you get the consistent data. And with the consistent data comes data that you can trust. With the RapidiOnline solution, we can guarantee that the data that you synchronize are up to date. So the whole quality part is improving significantly. It's also a way to utilize the systems much better. You can move some of your user accounts to be entirely Salesforce accounts if we bring the required ERP data over to the users that are dealing with customer requirements. And we also enable the internal teams to collaborate at a much higher level. Under the quality part, you will also see better reports. What we also see is a trend that when you start using these two systems in parallel, a lot of the reports that would typically be pulled out of the ERP system moves into Salesforce simply because it's easier to do the reporting from there, and you can combine ERP and CRM data to much more intelligent reports. The way you log on to RapidiOnline is a very secure way. It follows the App Exchange security standards. You have a username, you have a password. We don't store your password. You have a two-factor authentication code. In this case, it's the Google Authenticator installed on my iPhone. You key in the number, you press the login, and then you have a direct access to your different services. For a typical customer, you would just have one service, but in a situation like this, you could also have multiple services running, or if you are a partner, you could have the services running for your different customers. When we look at what we can actually integrate between the two systems, we don't really have any limitations. You can synchronize any data you want, regardless if it is standard data, meaning data that sits in the standard systems, either Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics. It can be custom tables or custom fields that you have created yourself, or it can be tables and fields that comes with apps and extensions that you install of either of the two systems. We also support integration in any direction, and it sounds pretty simple, but it's actually, or it can be quite complex. We can do a one-way integration, for instance, just from accounts to Salesforce to customers in Microsoft Dynamics. It could be bidirectional, which in some cases, for instance, for the account and customer is very, very common. You can have a one-to-one integration, so from one Salesforce to one ERP. You can have from many ERPs to one Salesforce. You can have the other way around, or you can even have a setup where you have many different systems that integrates to many different systems. It can be used both to do normal synchronization of your traditional data. It can be used to manage your master data across different platforms and systems, and for a lot of other purposes, automate business processes, etc. So extremely flexible in that way. We also support any version of the systems that you might have. On Salesforce, everybody are pretty much on the same version, but for the Microsoft Dynamics part, you can be on different versions. There's a different upgrade path for Microsoft Dynamics where you have the cumulative updates, or you might have an international setup where you are having Microsoft Dynamics installations with different versions in different countries. We support all versions all the way back to the versions released in 1989 up to the newest versions, and we also committed to support all future versions of the software. And we do that in one and the same platform. So once you are on the RapidiOnline platform, you can integrate your Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics solutions, regardless of which version you are on. You can also integrate systems on the Microsoft Dynamics side. For instance, you can have an AX, you can have NAV, you might have a Business Central in another country, and you can also synchronize these all together in either both between them and also into one instance of Salesforce. So it becomes something that can support your business, and you're not limited to stay on a particular version just for an upgrade reason. I will take you through a very common integration scenario. It's not the only scenario that we see, but it's just a very, very common. And there are all sorts of variations of this flow. So if you have any specific business case that you would like to that you would like us to elaborate on, just let me know, and we will do that. The blue boxes you will see on the screen represents Salesforce. The white boxes will represent Microsoft Dynamics ERP. That be regardless if it's NAV, AX, GP, Finance and Operations, or Business Central. The way it typically works when you have these two systems in parallel is that when you get a new lead from whatever lead source you have, it gets recorded as a lead in Salesforce. It gets marketing qualified, and once they have decided that it is something that is worth pursuing for the sales organization, they convert it into an account, a contact, and an opportunity. This is a standard Salesforce feature. It has nothing to do with the integration itself, but this is where the sales organization takes over the work and the possible account. The opportunity can carry a quote. You can also use some of the other Salesforce solutions, for instance, Salesforce CPQ, or you might have your own quotation tool made, or any other third-party solution where you do this work in. At a certain point in time, you can decide that this is the trigger for RapidiOnline to start synchronizing data for this account and this opportunity into the Microsoft Dynamics solution. Typically, it's when the opportunity reaches a stage which is called closed won. Rapidi will detect that, and we will create the customer inside of Microsoft Dynamics if the customer does not already exist. If you want to have contacts, we will synchronize the contacts into Microsoft Dynamics, and the quote that you have made in Salesforce will be converted to a sales order inside of Microsoft Dynamics. If you are not using sales orders, but you will want to send an invoice right away, then that step, of course, can be skipped. What we do is that the second we have created a new sales order inside of Microsoft Dynamics, we synchronize that information back into an object called Open Orders in Salesforce that can be linked to either an account or an opportunity or both. And that helps the salespeople to see directly in Salesforce what is the status of any given open sales order for this account. In this case, they don't have to switch to Microsoft Dynamics to get that information. They don't have to make internal calls to the order department to figure that information out, but they can see the information updated directly in Salesforce. Once the sales order is fully delivered and invoiced, then typically the open order that was sitting in Salesforce is removed, just like it is in Microsoft Dynamics, and it will only exist as a posted invoice or credit mode in Microsoft Dynamics, and we synchronize that information into the sales history object in Salesforce, where you can see what this account have purchased in the past. You have the same information typically in Salesforce as you have in Microsoft Dynamics, which means that you have the sales header and you have the sales lines with all the detailed information. If you're using items and you have synchronized these as well, then you can also see directly on an item which customers, for instance, have purchased this particular product. Once an invoice has been paid, it typically gets posted in Microsoft Dynamics as a ledger entry, or in AX it is called transactions. We can bring that over as payment history. It is related to the posted invoice and to the account as well, which enables us to give a financial summary directly, for instance, on an account where you can see overdue amounts, etc., so total sales to date and information like that. It's pretty cool. You can see that some of these integrations are marked as bidirectional, for instance, the customer and the contact. You don't have to do it. You don't have to decide that you have a particular record, which is the master. You can decide that you can create a new customer directly in Microsoft Dynamics. For instance, if you have a web shop that is attached to that, but we would still make sure that the other system is kept in sync regardless how you create a new record. But it's something that it is defined in your business process. So this is a very neat way of setting it up. There are some underlying transfers that also need to be in place. For instance, the product to item, the prices, discount models, etc. But all of that is also handled as part of the template solutions from Rapidi. The Lightning components that we have pre-built for Salesforce to display the information that comes from the ERP system, so the financial summary, the sales history, the open orders, and the ledger entries, are components that you can drag and drop into the pages in the Lightning model. If you're using Classic, you also have the possibility to see the information there. So this is a way to make it easy for you to get onboarded with the integration and utilize the information that comes from the ERP system right away in Salesforce without a need to do additional development. The objects are currently unmanaged. It means that you can change the look and feel, how it works. In the summer release of Salesforce, you also had a new feature called Dynamic Pages or Dynamic Lists, and that can also be used to display this information in a very simple way. What we have done here is that instead of just providing an API, we have built the templates, and we have also built additional information or functionality into Salesforce, so you have a much higher starting point for your integration than if you had to build everything from scratch. Nowadays, Microsoft Dynamics can be deployed in many different ways. It can be cloud-based, like Microsoft Dynamics 365. It can be hosted, which means basically an on-premise version in a hosting center somewhere. It can be on-premise. And we also have the possibility to install the Rapidi service engine, so the engine that actually runs the integration on your local servers in case you have a need for that. It's not so commonly used for the Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics integrations, but if you have an internal network where you have a lot of different Microsoft Dynamics systems running and you want to control your master data, you can then do that without having any data leaving your own network. It's easy to implement and to maintain. Here I'm going to add a field on the customer table. It's the home page, and in Dynamics, and it's called website in Salesforce. I add the two fields, I activate the changes, and that's basically all I need to do in order to add a new field to an existing transfer. So you don't need to go through comprehensive testing of code or any other things. You can just add the changes you want, activate it, and then it's ready to run. It's always a good idea to do it in a sandbox environment first, but the possibility is right at your fingertip with the RapidiOnline solution. With a great solution always comes great support. It's something that we measure very carefully because a lot of these integrations touch business critical processes. And as you can see, this is our support quality measured by client on each and every incident that we have had since 2017. On a score from 1 to 10, we have steadily been between 9 and 10. So overall, an excellent support, which we are pretty proud of. So the RapidiOnline platform is an all-inclusive platform. You have the myrapidi.com, which is the cloud platform where you have the integration configuration. Thomas will come back in not so long and actually show you how it works. It contains the data toolbox we can use to convert data and a lot of other things. We have a log with notifications. We can monitor how the system is performing. We have a proactive support, so in case something is happening on your side, so the synchronization stops, we can detect that and we will contact you and say, hey guys, you should do something about this. Do you need help? And then we have the Rapidi connector, which we use to connect on-premise systems to the cloud. This is actually all you need if you want to build the integration from scratch, but we have built the integration templates on top of that. The example that I took you through just before the quote to cash is one of them. They are complete business processes that are pre-configured based on the best practices, but they're customizable in any way you want. So you can change the flow, you can change the logic, you can change tables and fields to anything that matches your specific requirements. RapidiOnline is self-documenting. So whenever you have done a configuration inside of RapidiOnline, you can press a button and it will compile a complete PDF documentation of the settings. So in case you have to go through any kind of audits or reviews, you have that documentation at your fingertip as well. To make it even easier for you, we have the ERP Insight for Salesforce, which is the sales history, the open orders, payments, and finance overview. And that comes free of additional charges when you choose the RapidiOnline solution. And then we have support also included in our subscription. You can use it to maintain the integration. So the example I had just before, if you want to add a couple of fields to your existing integration, you just raise a ticket and we will help you do that without any charges. If you have bigger chunks of work like setting up a whole new integration, then it's something that would be quoted. It's typically 3 to 4 hours per table that we need to set up, test, and bring live. So it's not a massive amount of time that is required to do that. The most common support request we get is either related to data errors, so source data that is not accepted by the target system. An example is that in NAV you can write Mickey Mouse in the phone number field, and that is not accepted by Salesforce. But it's not always that the error messages that comes from the target system is easy to understand, so we can also help you decipher what that actually means. I'm just going to check if there are any questions so far. It does not seem to be the case. The implementation is quite smooth. Like everything else here at Rapidi, everything is template based. It increases the quality. It makes our implementation process and our solutions referenceable. The time it takes varies a little bit with what type of system we integrate with. I have made some ballpark figures for NAV, Business Central, GP, AX, and 365 for finance and operations. But the process that is used to do these type of integrations is exactly the same for the different solutions. The reason why it takes longer to do an AX implementation than, for instance, a Business Central implementation is simply because of the complexity in the system that we integrate with. The other parameter that can have an impact on how long it takes is the number of synchronizations that you want to set up. So basically, how many tables do you want to synchronize? And the time is fully dependent on how many transfers we actually need to set up, configure, and test and bring live for you guys. So if you have a very limited scope, it will be very few days. If you have a very large scope, it will be more days. We've only had one project that was more than 15 days for the AX implementation. So the numbers that we have here are pretty accurate. We also have some pre-configured subscriptions that you can choose. The parameters that you should be looking at is mainly the number of systems you want to integrate, how many companies you have in ERP, and how frequent that you would like your synchronization to run. We also have the possibility to build a custom subscription that match your specific requirements. So you do not necessarily have to fit into one of these categories. We can build one that match your business case precisely, which will, in most cases, will make it more affordable for you. We have, not surprisingly, quite a lot of happy customers. We have been doing data integration for more than 20 years, and data integration between Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics for more than 12 years. What all of these different clients have in common is that they have been through exactly the same process. They have set up integrations that are very similar, of course, with some variations. But it's a very good proof that the templates and the models that we are working with are performing extremely well. And I can see there are a couple of questions, but I'll just come back to them in a second. This was just a little introduction to how and what RapidiOnline can do at a high level. But let's try to dive a little deeper into it. And before handing over to Thomas, I'm just going to give you a little explanation about how the terminology works in RapidiOnline. We have something called connections, and a connection is a connection to a system or database. It could be either a connection to Salesforce, it could be a connection to Microsoft Dynamics, or it could be a connection, for instance, directly to a Microsoft SQL database. So this is how we connect to the systems. Then we have something called a transfer. And a transfer is a mapping of tables and fields and all the logic that applies, for instance, filters, data conversions, etc. And you will have a lot of these because there is a transfer for each synchronization you set up between the table in each direction. All the different transfers are grouped into something called a schedule. And a schedule contains the transfers and control how frequent and in which order transfers are executed. So this is where you set up, for instance, the synchronization frequency and where you make sure, for instance, that an account is created before a contact so you don't get errors from the system where you have relationships that are important to maintain. Everything that happens inside of your integration is stored in a log with information about what happens. It's important for me to say that we don't store any of your transfer data on any Rapidi servers at any time. From a GDPR perspective or data privacy perspective, it's quite important, but also it's none of our business. It also means that we don't have to store, as I mentioned before, any of your information on any FTP servers or any other things as we move along. The schedules, some of them exist as templates, and that is basically the pre-configured ones that comes out of the box for the Rapidi. The schedules are basically made the same way as a custom schedule, which you have to the left. So the templates are predefined business flows and transfers and schedules. And again, these can be modified to any of your specific requirements. And then the last component is the service itself. And within a service, you have all of these components in one service. And this service is basically what runs the integration. So I hope that is clear. And I'm just going to see if I can see the question I have here. There's a question that says regarding quote to cash, are you referring to the Salesforce object quote or the Salesforce object opportunity? So we are referring to the Salesforce opportunity, but we can also refer to the quotes inside of Salesforce, or it could be the Salesforce CPQ, for instance. Then we have another question. How does the integration tool show data that is incorrect and refused by one of the systems? I will leave that to Thomas when he gets into the more technical part of this. Then there's a question, is there full logging of exchange data so that the data exchange can be monitored and analyzed? Yes, there is, not for the specific data, but for instance, how many records were updated and how many megabytes. And if there is an error, that would be stored in the log, and you would receive an email with a direct link to that with the original error message. And we also have the possibility, if you contact our support, to do a specific trace of that. And then we have a question if we have references in the Dutch and or Belgian market, and yes, we do have that as well. Good. There are a lot of specific functionality that has been built into the RapidiOnline platform. I will not go through this because Thomas will cover most of it. I just want to bring the attention to the timestamp technology that we have. We call it the mirror, and it is used for systems that do not support timestamp in the database itself or in the integration technology provided by that solution. Good examples are, for instance, 365 Business Central, where the database itself does support timestamp, but the OData interface that Microsoft has created does not support timestamp. So in this case, we can provide that on top of the solution. It's very simple and it's included in the solution itself. And that gives you the ability only to synchronize new and modified data. It's also always used with GP and AX. So it's a quite important little thing. But I think we should have a look at it. I will monitor the different questions that comes in, but I'm gonna hand over to Thomas.
Okie dokie, let me unmute and share the correct screen. Please do let me know if you are seeing.
It's fine.
Okie dokie. Yeah. So this is an example of the MyRapidi app controlling the whole integration part of it. This is the first login entry. It's the dashboard, where you have a quick overview of what's happening here. You have the central service running on the Rapidi servers and the schedule thread running, monitoring when to run what. But to dive a little non-technical into the stuff there, let's start with the connections Henning mentioned. We support the whole Dynamics ERP range, and each connection is a bit different. We have the older like AX systems where we have a connector installed locally on in the local network. And that connects to the central service, and then we provide some parameters how to connect to it locally, and then we have full access to the SQL database to read data out, and then also a connector so we can access the web services, which would be an example here. Going in, adding new data to Dynamics AX. Then OData could be another example, and then you're in a whole different world where you don't need a local Windows connector to access the network. You could actually access that directly if it's 365 online. And the central Rapidi servers will then connect to that directly. So a lot of different systems and a lot of different connection methods. But when you kind of boil that down to what we do with our standard templates, then once you have the connections up and running, the logic behind that is pretty much the same. You have a connection, you have Salesforce, and you have a Microsoft Dynamics connection, and you have transfers set up, template transfers to go from one place to another. And those are set up, as mentioned, as templates for the most standard integrations, the customers, the contacts, the sales history towards Salesforce, adding opportunities or sales orders or quotes from Salesforce into the Dynamics systems as open sales orders could also be like open invoices to be ready to be booked and so on. So going to the transfers, what we do is we have a transfer. You can group them up, give them a description, but you have a source where they come from and a destination where they go to, depending on the connections that we have set up. There we read the metadata layout. So we have all the tables, the fields, field types, and so on accessible for our mapping. So we can map up the tables on the field level that we need. So we have pre-mapped the templates with like the standard fields, but if you have any additional fields, then they're really easy to map in Rapidi. Like, let me just show you. We do like name, and then you have a full list of the fields available on the side. And we also have, if we need to, a layout browser where you can actually see. Let me take the Salesforce part here and take account. And then you'll see all the fields available in your Salesforce org for the account, which type there are, if it's a pick list, what values you can give to it, and so on. And then I won't dive into the whole technical part of it, but you can then, from Salesforce pick lists, if you have option values or something, you can kind of translate those in Rapidi on the field list level. The nice thing about Rapidi is the wiki part. So if you see all those question marks placed around the My Rapidi app, those are help for the wiki. So go into whatever section you need to. You can see a description of what that section is about, what it does, and what your options are, and how to use it. A good example is our formulas. So that would be like if you have, if you are like a Dynamics nav guy, you have these option fields, and if you read out from a SQL database, those fields are numeric values like 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you turn them into Salesforce or you communicate with the nav web service, they want the text values. So there you can go in and use like a case sentence where you go in and say, okay, if field value 1, you do result 1. If field value 2, you do result 2, and so on and so forth. So you have the entire formula system to make sure that you can manipulate the data to fit, because the systems are differently designed. Going down to the mirror, Henning was talking about, we call it source control because we cover a lot of areas there. Reading from nav SQL, we can use the nav SQL timestamp, but when coming to AX and the Dynamics 365, we use a mirror technology. And that technology is to make sure that we only read new or changed data. So you set up a transfer, you have a link, you have some filters, which I will also get to in a second, but they will kind of determine what you read. And then we have a mirror technology that can go in and say, okay, I'm going to locally compare what do I need to take from my Dynamics ERP and put into Salesforce, because Salesforce has a limited API amount you can call every hour depending on your solution. So it's really important to filter those stuff out, so you only take the data you need to actually integrate and not do all the data every time. Going from nav, it's a bit more simple. They have a timestamp. There's also some technologies to kind of write back. A good example for the write back is actually the store new ID field. So if you have, like, one of the questions we had were if we could kind of take like an opportunity, or it had to be a sales order or a quote from Salesforce and put it into the ERP system, we can take all and we can add them over to the ERP system, Dynamics 365 or nav web services or whatever, and then we can actually get the sales order or invoice number, open invoice number that is assigned by the ERP system and write it back into Salesforce in the same transaction. So there are a lot of functionalities really special for the different Dynamics ERP systems, because even though they're all Dynamics, they're really different. But we really have the formulas, the functionalities, and so on to cover all of them. And what we did with the templates is to cover the basics. So the quote to cash Henning showed you with the standard mapping, but adding to that mapping is as simple as saying like new field. And then we don't have any new fields here, but and we don't have this sign there, bad example, but yeah, you can just look it up and say like this, and then add a new mapping, activate changes, and then you're good to go, and that is added to the mapping. So you don't need any coding. It's all like knowing your data, setting the right filters, having the right, like you can say, logic formulas. You don't need to be a programmer to understand. Yeah, then we can build a strong solution for you. Going forward a little bit on the execution of it, we have the schedules, which is set up on an interval level. So a schedule you can set up running on an interval, could be once a day for like sales history data, but could be down to like every hour or even on a minute kind of level. You can also trigger from Salesforce to call Rapidi to say, okay, we need to have this sales order created or this account created as a customer in our ERP system directly. That's also an option. But these schedules are set up, and these are your kind of monitoring base once you go live. So what you do is you set up the appropriate interval, could be called via a web service call, and then you can set an error interval, and you can set a notification interval. And the notification interval is quite important, because if you have a service with Rapidi, you also have a notification list, and that notification list, as soon as a notification interval is crossed, then you'll get a mail, get notified that, okay, something's wrong with this particular schedule. Could be a data issue. You'll have the data directly, the error message from the error system in your email, and a single link will take you directly into the log to show you what is wrong. And if you're not able to kind of decipher it, then you can use the get support and click, and then we'll help you out as soon as possible. The main thing here is you don't have to proactively monitor if Rapidi is not working correctly. You're going to get notified if something is wrong. And then on a log level there, we have runs, which will show you specific runs for specific schedules. That'll kind of cook them down a little bit. You have a log which logs everything that Rapidi does. So that's error messages, and it's going to be from the system that produces the error. So if Salesforce is complaining about like a related ID is not valid, or this name is not valid because we have some duplex functionality on the Salesforce side, you're going to get the Salesforce error message directly in Rapidi, and the opposite around. If you're communicating with AX or GP or NAV, you're going to get the NAV messages or the GP messages or the AX messages directly. So you're not going to learn a new system. You're getting error messages and deciphering error messages from systems that you're used to working with. I think that'll be kind of my base demo line here. Let me know if you want me to show you anything else.
Good. I'm just giving you a few seconds to write if you have any questions before we move on. It does not seem to be the case. Otherwise, you can still continue to ask when we go on. We are almost there. So Thomas showed you a little bit about how RapidiOnline works. Of course, there are a lot more details in the system, which we are happy to show you if you're interested to learn more about RapidiOnline. We still have the possibility to take more questions. I hope you have gotten a flavor for the simplicity, the robustness, and the ease of use when it comes to integrations with RapidiOnline. And I want to encourage you to go to our website, to the resource section, or take the handouts that are on this webinar and explore the different standard solutions that we have further. Or if you have specific questions, you are more than welcome to come back to us, and we would be happy to help you with your inquiries. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to consume this and ask any questions. And if there are no further, then we're going to end this session. So those of you who feel comfortable about what you've heard today and you don't have further questions, please feel free to leave now. And if anyone else wants to stay in here, then you're also welcome to do that. But thank you very much from Thomas and myself. It was a pleasure having you here. There are no further questions. So thank you very much for your time today. Please feel free to reach out to us and have a fantastic day. Thank you very much.